Split Second is a good game. No wait, let me rephrase. Split Second is an amazing game. It's an intense arcade racer with a unique strategic element in the form of huge explosions and destruction. It's often described as being similar to the Burnout games, which is not surprising seeing that some of the devs had previously worked on the Burnout franchise. I'd like to think that the development team was spitballing ideas after a sweaty Burnout 3 session, and one of them was like, hey, you know what would be super cool? What if we combined the racing and crash modes into a single experience? And the rest of them were like, whoa. Because that's kind of what Split Second is. It's now more than 10 years old, releasing on the PS3, PSP and the 360 back in 2010. It got a Steam version for Windows a few years later, and it even had an iOS port. What puzzles me is that for as good as it is, and as well as it reviewed back in 2010, it was still a commercial disaster. So how did this happen? Was the gaming media high on crack? Were they paid off by Disney? And if the game truly is as good as the reviews say, and in my opinion it is, why didn't anyone buy it? Split Second is structured like a conventional racing game. It has a campaign, quick play events, 2-player split screen, and it has an online multiplayer. Sorry, it had an online multiplayer. The campaign, which is called Season Mode, sort of has a story. There's something about the races being part of a TV show, but there aren't any characters or even people in the cutscenes, so it's all a bit vague. To be honest, you could remove the story from the game entirely and it wouldn't make a difference. Season Mode is the meat of the game, and it's where you'll unlock content for the multiplayer and quick play. It's broken into 12 seasons, each containing 6 events. These range from typical races against 7 other cars to survival events where you have to dodge barrels shooting out of the back of a truck or missiles from a helicopter. There are time trials where the game throws every obstacle it can at you, elimination races where the slowest car is detonated until only one car is left, and finally the elite races, which are kind of like boss battles. You earn points for placing high enough, which unlocks new events, seasons and vehicles. If this sounds like too much work, you can unlock everything for the low price of $4.95 with the Master Unlock DLC pack. This basically defeats the purpose of playing the game though. All up, you can probably complete the season mode in about 10 hours, although you might need a couple more on top of that if you want to unlock every car. If you were to strip away the explosions and the epic track design, the driving in Split Second is actually quite conservative. There's no car customization or any other kind of crazy performance modifiers. Your speed ultimately comes down to finding the perfect racing line and maximizing your car's potential. All of the cars have different characteristics, but they essentially fall into 2 distinct categories: drift and grip. Drift cars are very tail happy and don't need much encouragement to power slide when cornering, whereas the grip cars really need to be flung into a corner to get the arse to step out. The other differences in performance are acceleration and top speed, which are self-explanatory, and then there's strength. This determines how easily you can get knocked around by other cars and explosions. The vehicles you unlock later on in the game are often faster than the ones you start out with, but unlike in other games, these cars don't completely outclass all of the earlier ones because their stats tend to be more extreme. The fastest cars typically have terrible strength, meaning that even a sparrow's fart will send you flying, and they require significantly more skill to drift. The quickest car in the game, for example, is so much faster than anything else, but it's difficult to keep on the road and tiny errors can lead to a wipeout. As a result, car balance across the roster is pretty good overall. Which car works best for you will come down to a number of factors. Your personal driving style and how you approach each race strategically, the event, because some vehicles suit certain events better than others, and also who you're racing against, whether it be a real person or the AI. When you dive into an event, this is where Split Second stops being a conventional racer. Being the fastest doesn't guarantee you the win because the cars behind have many opportunities to take you out. And when you're out in front, there's no way to defend other than driving as fast as possible. Drifting is a key strategic component, although not in the way you might think. Yeah, going sideways through a corner feels orgasmic, but it doesn't always provide a speed advantage. If you nail the angle and the apex of the corner perfectly, then in some situations it can be faster, but it's not like Mario Kart where a perfectly executed drift always provides a boost of speed. The main reason drifting is important is that it builds meter. In a similar way to the Burnout games, drifting, drafting, passing cars and avoiding danger all build meter. Meter is important because it lets you perform power plays, which can slow down other cars or create shortcuts that give you a quicker and safer route. For the cars that lack overall top speed, making sure that you have enough meter to prevent your rivals from disappearing off into the distance is vital. If it wasn't obvious, races are chaotic. It's never quite clear who's going to win because things tend to go sideways on the final lap, so while the racing itself is conventional, events are usually determined by power play strategy. Despite the chaos, however, it rarely feels like the races are decided by chance. Sure, it's annoying to get wiped out just before the finish line, but there was usually something you could have done to avoid it. And I think this is one of the main reasons that Split Second is such a good game. It caters to both people who excel at traditional races and also those who prefer something more along the lines of rock and roll racing. All things considered, it's still a great looking game. The development team said they wanted it to look like a movie, and I'd say in this regard they absolutely nailed it. One of the things that sets it apart from other races is the simple, almost diegetic UI. This lets you focus on the action, rather than filling up the screen with superfluous information like revs or how fast you're going. You do get a more traditional HUD using the dash cam, but it's a far cry from most other racing games. Interestingly, it looks like there was a bonnet cam at some point during development. It's a shame this didn't make it into the final build, but maybe they ran out of time or there was some technical or gameplay reason it was dropped. It's a fantastic sounding game too. With so much happening in a race, there was a risk of the audio mix sounding like a bunch of trash can lids being banged together. Thankfully, this isn't the case. Explosions rumble with Jurassic Park levels of bass, and every vehicle has a gravelly snarl you can hear as you whip past it. The music isn't incredible, but it does suit the action. It has a theatrical sounding score which plays nicely into the TV show theme. This prevents the game from feeling as dated as some of its contemporaries, which often chose to use licensed tracks. I do have a couple of minor complaints. One of these is that some of the trailers have commentary which tells you which driver triggered a power play. It would have been awesome if this had made it into the game. Not only would it make the events more exciting, but it would have made each race feel more like a show. Outside of the season intros and outros, the whole TV show thing gets forgotten. My all-time favourite combat racer, Rock and Roll Racing, yes, that is the second time I've mentioned it in the same video, does this to great effect, and it's one of the few areas I think that Split Second missed the mark. My other complaint is that the announcer's voice in the cutscenes between seasons is so much louder than anything else. The first few times it made me crap my pants because it caught me completely off guard.
This is Split Second.
Okay, now you're probably thinking, yeah mate, I get it, it's a good game, but why didn't it sell? As I mentioned earlier, it reviewed well and the reception from players was equally warm. What doomed the game was a perfect storm of events, and in my opinion, just plain old bad luck. May of 2010 was the worst possible time for it to ship. It was an absolutely stacked month with loads of big games coming out, such as Skate 3, Lost Planet 2, UFC 2010, and Super Mario Galaxy 2. Additionally, both Blur and Mod Nation Racers, two big arcade racing games, one of which was extremely similar, also released that month. The biggest blow, however, would be dealt on May 18th, which was when Split Second launched in North America, with Alan Wake, Prince of Persia, and Red Dead Redemption all coming out on the same day. With so many blockbusters all landing at the same time, it's unsurprising that it failed to find an audience. So May was, in professional terms, a shit time to release a game. It might seem like the obvious solution would have been to move the launch date, and I'm sure in hindsight those working at Disney Interactive wish they did, but 2010 was a pretty terrible year to release a racing game, period. The list of racing games that launched that year is long, and it includes some notable entries from some big franchises like Need for Speed, Formula 1, and Gran Turismo. The similarities between Split Second and Blur in particular, and their proximity, undoubtedly hurt both games, although I think Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, which launched later that year, was probably the most damaging. Hot Pursuit was a big deal at the time, and you only need to look at the marketing to realise why no other arcade racer stood a chance. The trailers for Blur and Split Second do a decent job of making each game appear exciting, but did you see the trailer for Hot Pursuit? If you're looking at picking up the game today, you have a few options. The two most obvious are the PS3 and the Xbox 360 versions, which are both reasonably cheap and easy to find. Performance on the 360 version is pretty solid even when half the track in front of you is collapsing in an explosion. The PS3 version isn't quite as solid, but it does run at a native 720p, whereas the 360 version is a bit lower, with a vertical resolution of 627. Both versions suffer from quite a lot of screen tearing. This mostly happens during power plays and is definitely worse on the PS3. Overall, I'd say the 360 version looks slightly more polished despite being a fraction softer. Of course, if you have an Xbox One or a Series X or S, you can play it up to 4K and at 60 frames per second. Additionally, playing it on the newer hardware might clean up some of the screen tearing too. The PC port unfortunately wasn't handled by BlackRock, and it has a few problems. For starters, it's locked to 30 frames per second. There are mods that can boost the frame rate, but this is supposedly quite fiddly to get working, and it messes up some of the power play timings. According to some angry Steam reviews, there are issues with saving your progress too. It's still available to purchase on Steam, so there's that, but I don't think this is the best way to play it. Oh, and there's a PSP version of the game too. Yeah, it's not as terrible as the reviews would have you believe. It's just, well, you get the picture. While some of this might make the game sound bad from a presentation and performance point of view, and that the Xbox and PlayStation versions are dramatically different, at the end of the day they all look pretty similar in motion, and overall, regardless of how you choose to play, the game holds up extremely well, except on PSP. Split Second will never get a sequel or a remaster. Its poor commercial performance and the fact that BlackRock's studio was shut down barely a year after its launch has almost guaranteed that. If we're lucky, someone will make a spiritual successor one day, but for now, I definitely recommend this to anyone who's a fan of arcade racing games and specifically the Burnout series. Oh yeah, and rock and roll racing fans too. 3 times. If you enjoyed this video, a like is always appreciated, and of course a dislike will let me know I need to improve. If you're new around here, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when new videos go live. And if you want to support the channel and find out more about how I make these videos, head on over to the Patreon page. Otherwise, thanks for your time.